This morning, a small Arkansas town reeling after a deadly mass shooting at a supermarket.
We are live here at Mad Butcher in Fordyce, and there is a shooting going on.
At least 3 killed and 10 wounded, including 2 police officers, according to authorities. Overnight, officials also identifying the suspect as 44-year-old Eugene Posey, charged with 3 counts of capital murder with additional charges pending.
There's somebody lying in the parking lot, shot.
Witnesses capturing the terrifying moments as the shooting unfolded around 11:30 a.m. Friday morning at the Mad Butcher supermarket in Fordyce, more than an hour south of Little Rock. Police and rescue personnel scrambling to the scene, 2 police officers shot as well as the suspect, none with life-threatening injuries.
We had 11 civilian shots. 3 of those are deceased, and we do have some that are critical.
This tragic story happens all too often in the United States of America. I mean, whether it's at a nightclub, at a school where the future generation is learning, or at a grocery store like we see here. More folks just sadly lose their lives with no explanation, and we offer our thoughts and prayers, and then a few days later, it's just business as usual. You know, a lot of these mass shootings end with the shooter taking his life, but in this situation, the suspect was actually taken into custody, and he had actually exchanged fire with 2 of the law enforcement officers and was actually hit. He obviously lived, and he is now facing 3 counts of capital murder. And what this means is that if he's found guilty of these offenses, then he could be put to death. And I think that's just going to be another tragedy because, you know, we have yet another life lost in addition to the 4 that were already taken and the numerous others that were wounded in this incident. And, you know, at some point, if he hasn't already, he is going to be assigned an attorney. There's likely going to be a public defender who is tasked with defending this individual and trying to eventually humanize him and understand what was going through his head and trying to put the pieces together. And, you know, naturally as a criminal defense attorney, I think about when I see these cases and, you know, how I would approach my defense in this situation. And I just started kind of thinking about the factors that contribute to these mass shootings. And, you know, I think there are a lot of things that are kind of outside of the control of these individuals that contribute to them carrying out the acts that they did. Now, again, ultimately, the responsibility is on the person, right? But again, sometimes the contributing factors can be so massive that they're almost overwhelming for the person, and they're a victim of their own circumstances. And, you know, that's a debatable topic, and you could have 50 people on one side and 50 people on the other. But I do believe that it is undeniable, at least these factors that I want to discuss, because, you know, they're common themes that we see in these cases. And so the first one has to do with mental health. You know, many mass shooters suffer from severe mental health illnesses, and this can include depression, psychosis, or some sort of personality disorder. And hey, don't get me wrong, just because you have some sort of mental health issue doesn't mean that you are going to be a mass shooter. Obviously, there are plenty of people who suffer from mental health issues who don't end up committing any sort of violent acts whatsoever, let alone, you know, a mass shooting. But when you have unresolved mental health issues combined with other stressors or other contributing factors, this can increase the risk of violent behavior. And it goes without saying that there is just inadequate access to mental health resources in the United States. And, you know, it's the lack of access, but it's also just the lack of recognition that there is a mental health issue in the first place and what we're supposed to do about it. I can't tell you how many times I've represented an individual, and, you know, after you've spoken to thousands of clients over the years, you start to see patterns, right? And we as criminal defense attorneys, we're able to say, hey, you know, I think there might be some sort of a mental illness that has contributed to this situation, or it can be so extreme that the mental illness prohibits the lawyer from, engaging with their client at a level that would allow them to properly represent that individual. And when that happens, we then have to raise the issue to the judge so that they can be put on the mental health track to figure out whether they're going to be competent to stand trial. But in talking with the family of these individuals, you find out, hey, we always knew that something was off, right? But we never took him to a psychologist. We never, there's never been any sort of formal diagnosis. They've never been put on any sort of medication. They haven't gone through any sort of therapy to help resolve these issues. And so over time, it almost is like a ticking time bomb where, you have this issue and it just gets worse and worse and worse, because it's similar to any sort of physical illness, right? If you can intervene early on and address the issue, you may not be able to eradicate it completely, but maybe you can keep it under control and be on top of it and see warning signs, right? And you can have the proper medication prescribed, or you can do the proper therapy and exercises to, minimize the harm. But when these things go completely unchecked, this can certainly be a contributing factor to a person who ends up engaging in one of these mass shootings. One of the other contributing factors that is absolutely undeniable is our access to guns in the United States. A study was conducted which revealed that in 2017, U.S. civilians held an average of 120.5 guns per 100 people. This means that there are more guns than actual people. And this is the highest rate in the world by a factor of more than 2. In comparison, in Canada, our neighbors to the north, they only have about 34.7 guns per 100 people. In Germany, it's about 19.6. And in the UK, it's only 5. So only 5 guns per 100 people. And the reality is we have relatively lax gun laws compared to other developed nations. The Second Amendment of the Constitution protects our rights to keep and bear arms, and this leads to a significant cultural and legal factor that contributes to gun accessibility in this country. In other countries in the world, they just have a lot more strict gun control laws. For example, in Japan, gun ownership is highly regulated and civilians are rarely allowed to own firearms. And in order to own a gun in Japan, you have to undergo rigorous background checks, mental health evaluations, and extensive training. In European countries, they also have stricter regulations, which include mandatory background checks, waiting periods, and requirements for secure storage of firearms. Just the widespread availability of firearms in the United States just makes it easier for individuals to carry out mass shootings. And I know this is a very hot button issue. It is always the topic of political debate. Should we have more strict gun control laws, or should those not be infringed in any way? The folks that argue that our gun laws should remain untouched, they rely on the Second Amendment, but the reality is the accessibility to guns in the United States is certainly a contributing factor to these mass shootings. Another sad contributing factor ends up being social marginalization. Many mass shooters feel socially isolated, they're marginalized or ostracized, and this can stem from bullying or rejection or just other forms of social exclusion, starting from youth, going through adolescence, and even into adult life. That lack of feeling of connection to society and those feelings of loneliness and alienation can also lead to violent outbursts. Somebody who feels connected to their society, who feels love for their community, is not going to go out and do something like this to just, decide that they're going to take the lives of others who oftentimes they don't even know. One of the other contributing factors tends to be just these perceived injustices or grievances. We'll see, someone might write a manifesto or some sort of diary entry that we see that a person had an issue with particular individuals or a type of group or society as a whole. And so when you have this mix of mental illness mixed with easy accessibility to firearms, and you have this agenda that someone has, it really is a dangerous mix that can lead to these type of tragedies. You know, his defense attorney will have the tall order of representing him and protecting his constitutional rights, making sure that he gets treated fairly within the system. And, you know, I'm sure that you'll see in comment sections all over when it comes to this tragedy that people are ready to, you know, put him in the chair immediately, or have him lethally injected immediately, or, you know, take him out and shoot him in the streets, right? But, you know, we have laws, and, you know, in the United States, we don't pick and choose who has, you know, the right to counsel, the right to a fair trial in front of a jury. No, like, everybody has the right to these things without exception, and he'll go through these procedures. He'll have his due process. He is innocent unless and until he is proven guilty or accepts his guilt. And ultimately, he'll likely be convicted, and he'll be sentenced to death, and he'll wait on death row for a number of years until his life ends. And again, that's just going to be another life that is taken, sadly. But my hope is that at some point, we really do have the serious discussion on how we deal with this problem in our country, because that's the thing about problems. They don't tend to just solve themselves, right? They don't solve themselves. And if you don't address the issue, you're going to have the same thing happen over and over and over and over again. Well, you know, my heart goes out to all the individuals who lost their lives, their families, trying to put the pieces together, those who were wounded, just the city on a whole who is going to be suffering from this, possibly forever. And again, I just really hope we can make some sort of progress. You know, how many shootings have to happen? When is enough for us to really take this issue seriously and dive into finding real solutions? Well, if you got something out of this, please show me some love, hit the like button, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace.